Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Zach Scheel, CEO of Rhumbix, a construction workforce management platform that's raised $46 million in funding. Zach, how are you?
Doing great, Brett. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. So first off, I know you spent some time in the Navy, so thank you very much for your service. Have to always give a shout out to the veterans, so thank you.
Thanks for your support.
Now, I know you spent 5 years in the military. What was that journey like for you, or what was the experience like, I should say?
It was amazing. The Navy paid for undergraduate, so it was kind of my ticket out of Cincinnati, Ohio, where I grew up, and then owed them 4 years, ended up doing 5, and that's really where I cut my teeth in the construction industry. I was managing construction projects up in the Pacific Northwest, and then also in Northeast Africa. And so, I got to travel the world for a little farm kid from Ohio and see a whole lot of things, and kind of put me on the trajectory and life path that I've been on for the last 20 years since then.
Did you have a plan in your head, like, okay, I'm going to learn some stuff here and then go out and build a tech company? Or like, when did that start to form as an idea for you?
Yeah, it wasn't until I left the Navy and ended up at Stanford for grad school. And even Stanford, my career vision essay, I wrote about going to work for Bechtel Corporation and ended up working with them for my summer internships. And the second one, I was on a large copper mine in northern Chile and kind of realized I didn't want to work for Bechtel, the company that I had written my essay, about my career vision. And so I'm on this project site at the world's largest copper mine, one of like 20 English-speaking people on like an 8,000 person job site. And so I had plenty of time in the evenings to think about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And basically I started a Word document of companies I would start or early stage companies I would join. And Rhumbix was born out of the list of ideas for companies I would start.
And what was that aha, or what was that insight that you had, and how have you seen it evolve over the past decade?
Yeah, so on that job site, I was on a team that was responsible for project cost controls.
Mm-hmm.
And the primary source of data that we needed to do our job was coming from 1,000 paper time cards handwritten in Chilean Spanish. Then a 70-person clerical staff took 3 to 4 days to translate to English, put into an Excel spreadsheet that was uploaded to an Access database. That a week later, we began auditing the data, and almost all of it was wrong. A high degree of inaccuracy and a high degree of latency. The nature of this project contract vehicle is what's called cost plus, which means any overages were passed on to the owner. And so it became a very contentious situation with the owner on that project. And, that was just kind of like, hey, Bechtel's number one builder in the world. And, they're struggling to have, real-time accurate data from the field. And, at this point in time, this was 2013. Early days of Uber, you're seeing kind of the utility of mobile applications, and even in the construction industry, iPads were starting to show up on job sites. And so, that was kind of the light bulb epiphany moment. I saw a big problem. I was not naive enough to think I could go out and solve it myself. So basically I had another year at Stanford, dialed back my course load to stay there longer and work on Rhumbix kind of full time outside of class. And I incorporated the company and launched about a year later after that second internship with Bechtel.
What were those early years like? We were talking pre-interview. I'm sure construction tech has always been cool, but it really feels like it's cool now. There's a lot of founders, there's a lot of investors, there's a lot of hype. What were those early years like?
Yeah. I mean, it was the wild, wild west. It was really kind of trailblazing your own path. The original idea for Rhumbix was actually not what we do today. So we started out as a wearables IoT platform. I'd had a Fitbit at the time and was kind of thinking, could I use risk-mounted wearables to track work on job sites the same way the Fitbit knows when you're running, biking, swimming? And so that's really what our initial MVP was that we started developing and raised our seed round on. And at the time, the Fitbit parsed all the accelerometer data on device. And so that wasn't going to work for what we needed. And the only thing we could find was a Samsung Gear Live watch, like a very early version. This was pre-Apple Watch and everything. And so, the summer of 2014, my co-founder and I would wake up at, 4:30 in the morning, drive down to Stanford's campus, get a bunch of donuts and burritos to take out to the job sites. And we had a bunch of hacked together Samsung Gear Live watches that we were hooking up construction workers to. So they would start work at 6 a.m. every morning. And it wasn't two guys in the garage, but it was, two guys spending a lot of time at coffee and donut shops and construction project sites. And yeah, you just kind of had to figure it out. There was no playbook. There was not a lot of other companies that had kind of built a lot of field software. Most of the software that existed in the industry at the time was built for people that sat behind desks. And so it was very much that adage of a startup, being jumping off a cliff and trying to build a plane before you hit the ground. That's what we did.
At what point did you decide to not do hardware?
Yeah. So within like the first year, a couple of things had gone through. We went through StartX, like an accelerator down related to Stanford, and that was good. We really got pushed hard by a mentor that we had at the time, Jennifer Gill Roberts. She's still an advisor and an investor to the company, and she's great. And, it was pushing us to really question, what we were trying to do, what the industry actually needed. We liked a lot of the health and safety potential of the wearables, but there was also a lot of headwinds around hooking up wearables to unionized construction workers. Unions were okay if it showed how good they were and better than non-union workers, but if they showed anything else, they didn't want them using it. And so at the same time, we heard a ton of just customer feedback and customer discovery around, I understand what you're trying to do and I like the idea, but honestly, if you could get rid of these paper time cards, I'd pay you for that today. And, that's where I really stress the importance of listening to the market. Like the founder doesn't get to dictate product market fit. The market dictates product market fit. And so, have conversations with 100 different prospective customers, like, really listen to them. And we're hearing that market signal, loud and clear that, I don't need a wearable IoT solution. What I need is to get rid of paper and have this data accurately from the field so that I can actually see what's going on every day. And so, yeah, it was kind of 1 to 2 years in, we set aside the wearables component of it and really focused on what the product is today, which is just really a mobile first SaaS product that captures a bunch of different workflows in the field from workers.
How hard was it to make that pivot? I've been through a few pivots in my life, and I don't want to say it's like ego. I think it's part of like, just as a founder, you have to be able to like push through, like make anything happen, but you also have to know when it's time to pivot. And I've always found those are two like very conflicting things, like never stop, but also like stop.
Yeah. No, I think, whatever next startup I do in the future, it'll be a lot easier to pivot. But, in the beginning, you're like, hey, I raised money from these people. Like they were kind of bought into this vision, and you almost feel a little guilt or shame around telling them, hey, that's not right. And Drew, my co-founder, and I, just over a course of several weeks, maybe a month, making that decision. And then once we finally did and updated our investors, they were like, I think that's a great pivot. Hardware is expensive. Like there's all the reasons they can fail, like supply chain, like just do a pure SaaS software play. And so that was kind of like eye-opening to me, just like, not being too tied to that vision. I think it's super important for an early stage founder to believe 100% in that vision, but also be willing to question it and change course, when the market's telling them to. And, I think, I'm 11 years into this journey, and you look at the successful companies and almost all of them have pivoted. Slack being your classic example, right? They're like a video game company and, turned into a 27 billion messaging team app where others had failed. And so, having done this a while, I think, I thought pivot was a negative thing when I started the company, and it's actually not. It's like the smart thing to do and, what the experienced entrepreneur does to get to that right product market fit.
So you make the pivot 1 to 2 years in, like, is it instantly you're sitting there thinking like, man, I'm a genius. This is a good idea. Or are there like just little crumbs that you're on the right path and it still takes some time to get traction?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like we were getting a lot more validation. Definitely the number of people that are like, hey, I'm interested. We still had to build out a lot more of the software products, but we were able to get, our first customer a lot easier than kind of, hey, we're going to procure all these wearables. We're going to wire up all your workers. And, that was a heavier lift on the construction company for a problem that, was a big problem that they, were interested in, but it wasn't a top 3 problem that they were like, hey, I'd love to solve this today. And so, yeah, maybe 9 months or so after we got through the pivot, we launched and got our first paying customer. And then, shortly after that, the first one was very much still like a proof of concept, but I think it was maybe 3 months after that, we got our first like commercial contract. And then from there, the flywheel started going and we started taking off.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
What did they see in you to give you that chance to pay you money? Because I have to imagine it's high stakes, right? Like if you get this wrong, they could face probably penalties. Like there's a lot that can go wrong if you were wrong. So how'd you build that trust?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the bottom line is you do it any way you can, right? And so there was kind of two folks that were early adopters. And so one was Kevin Sue, was at Air Systems. He was a IT director at a mechanical contractor down in San Jose, but had seen what was going on with PlanGrid and the traction there and had always been kind of interested in tech and startups. And so he had been an advisor to Kevin Spain over at Emergence Capital. And so we were pitching Emergence Capital. And so they introduced Kevin to kind of validate the idea. And he's like, yeah, we would use this. And so, that was one of the two kind of first customers where, it was a guy who understood startups and technology, who was an IT director and kind of, was very excited for all the other different workflows that they could digitize within his company. And then the other was HT Tran over at Anvil Builders. So he was a veteran that started a construction company. And so we got connected up with him through some other veteran. And yeah, he was just like, hey, yeah, building this business. I see what you guys doing. Like, want to be helpful however I can. And, took a risk on us because of that shared kind of veteran camaraderie, that we both had. And so, I think the common theme between the two of those is finding that intrinsic motivation. For Kevin, it was, being a tech nerd or geek and wanting to see more technology at his company. And for HT, it was, wanting to support a fellow veteran and seeing an opportunity to help his business as well. And yeah, those were our first two kind of early customers.
Especially on the veteran side, that makes sense for a founder-led sales playbook. At what point did you start to, run out of veterans to talk to or to talk to? 'Cause I've run, not a veteran playbook, but a similar one where like at a certain point it starts to shift and you have to shift out of founder-led sales. And it's very hard to do that, or it's been hard for me. And I know there's a lot of other founders out there that's hard. What was that like for you making that transition out of founder sales?
Yeah, our second sale was to a customer. Our third customer, Heat Masters out of Chicago, is still with us today. They're like 9 years in. They're like a smaller shop. I have no idea how they found us. I have to go back and look through old emails and stuff. But yeah, that one was one that actually a sales guy on my team had closed without me. And so, I think it was super important. I was very involved through, the first couple million of sales and still am today with being exec support. And the industry likes to buy from people that understand their problems. And I think founder market fit is very important in the construction industry, especially now where there has been a lot of scar tissue created from people that have a technology that's trying to find a problem in the industry. I think that there was, a lot of that with the drone hype cycle and, drones are cool technology and I know the value of it. I used to pay $1,000 a month when I was in the Navy to have a guy with a helicopter come and take pictures from overhead of the project I was managing. And so the use case is great. But yeah, I think a lot of people oversold technology and it kind of overpromised, underdelivered. But the construction industry is very different kind of SaaS unit economics than more horizontal plays. The sales cycle will be longer, but the retention is going to be higher. They want to find a long-term partner. They're typically a little bit earlier in their procurement of technology in terms of sophistication. And so they're not, looking to switch. They really want to partner with you. And so, I think it was probably somewhere between 1 and 2 million, ARR, where I had the sales team, there was deals closing that I had never kind of been involved. But, definitely through that first million, I think the founder needs to be, on at least one call in every deal.
And early on, what was the marketing philosophy, the marketing strategy? And then how have you seen it evolve to what it is today?
Yeah, we got a good brand reputation right out of the gate because we were taking little Jack Daniels bottles and putting a Rhumbix logo on them and handing them out at conferences. So
This is awesome.
yeah, taking a playbook out of fraternity, social chair playbook. We still do that today. I literally was at a conference a month ago and a guy came up and was like, "Hey, you're the whiskey guys, right? Can I get some whiskey?" Early on, it was getting out to conferences, and that's something that today is still a big part of our customer acquisition motion. Sure, inbound works. We get a good steady trickle of inbound, from the various kind of content marketing and lead gen sources that we kind of put out there. But really what I found most effective is this is still a, press the flesh industry is how they like to say it. You got to meet the customers where they are. You got to not just the national shows, you got to be at the regional shows, getting good with the industry associations. There's a lot of peer groups and people share. And that's kind of like probably the best referral you can get is like a CEO of a current customer telling another CEO, "Hey, we use this product. It's good. I get a lot of value out of it." Like, that's the best piece of content marketing that you could ever generate. It's tough to scale that, but it's kind of the reality of the industry.
What about the marketing team? How big is the marketing team? And what have you learned from building the marketing team?
Yeah. I mean, it's always been a lean team. And actually, in the last couple of years, we made a pivot to get to profitability. And so right now, it's fully outsourced. We work with a guy that's a former CMO of a construction tech company who's been working with us. But what I'm excited about kind of moving forward is rebuilding that marketing team with a lot of the AI native tools that are out there. And so I'll be opening up a rack here in the next couple of months for a go-to-market engineer, somebody who can really orchestrate, the data enrichment, take everything from Salesforce, doing a lot more targeted, text only, emails. Doesn't look like a marketing campaign. But yeah, it's talking to lots of other construction tech founders. The marketing can be a big source of burn on your budget if you let it. I think, Procore is the only venture-backed company that's gone through IPO. And, during the height of their growth, they were spending $3 on sales and marketing for every $1 revenue that they were generating. So, a couple of years ago, as, the venture capital world was freezing over, we kind of made the decision that, we're going to pivot to profitability and, have a lower growth rate, but grow profitably. And so, basically zeroed out marketing and starting to build it up right now.
Wow, that's crazy. I feel like there's a lot of companies who went through something similar though. So you're definitely not alone in that.
Yeah, some tough times, but good to be on the other side of them. And feels good to not have to rely on outside capital to grow the business ever again also.
Yeah. Was that 2022?
Yeah. So basically had a term sheet in late 2022 that was pulled in like November, right before Thanksgiving. And so, yeah, it was like, nobody was getting out the checkbook, all the recessionary headwinds on the horizon. And, met with our board, got together a bridge round and basically got, came up with a plan to, get to profitability over the next couple of years. And, it was a lot of, cost cutting that was primarily headcount, which was definitely tough to do. And, certainly nothing worse as a founder and a CEO than lay off people who have done nothing wrong, especially into a pretty bad job market. So yeah, it was, kind of 2 years of just kind of getting through some tough times, but, thankfully we got through them. And, in hindsight, they were difficult decisions to make, but absolutely the right ones. And, the team and the company is very well positioned for the road ahead from here on.
Yeah, I feel like everyone who went through that, they came out on the other end stronger. As cheesy as that is, every company I know, like that was the reality. Like it's a cheesy cliche advice for a reason.
You gotta walk through the fire sometimes. Like, you can read all the, the hard thing about hard things, books that you want, but, getting that experience, you only get it from being in the driver's seat during a tough stretch like that.
Yeah, 100%. What did you learn, during that period? Any lessons that have just stuck with you now that you're through it?
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the biggest things was just, like how resilient a team can be, of the folks that we were left with after we got done with productions of force. We only lost one person since then. And it was a guy that really wanted to get back to the construction industry and put anything around the company. And so it was great to see the team kind of, galvanize and come together and kind of push forward. But like the big learning for me was just how capable that team was. We'd probably reduce headcount like 55, 60%, but we maybe only lost, 30% of the capacity of the company. And so, we went from 50 down to like 20, but at a 50-person team, it was amazing to me how much kind of fat we had collected along the way. Just when you're in a high growth VC backed operating mode, like, I mean, that's part of it. It was growth at all costs until it was profitability at all costs. And that pivot happened very quickly in the market.
Very fast. It was like 6 months, basically. It felt like, I don't know, maybe it was longer, but it felt like that was like a 3 to 6 month period.
Oh my God, yeah. It was just like all of a sudden it was like everyone has to have a board plan with a path to profitability like immediately. And, for me, yeah, it was like when we were scaling and growing, it was growth at all costs, everyone's kind of saying, hey, I need this headcount for this, for X, Y, and Z. And, my big learning was like, doing this again, I think you'll be able to push the team to do a lot more with the resources they have. And, AI is a game changer now. You can get by with so much more where you don't need a specialist. You can get 80, 90% of a specialist, through some sort of a genetic AI platform. So just completely different set of tools. But yeah, I think, my big learning, I wish I would have, pushed out hires longer and, not like made employees squeal more, but made, kind of get by longer without that additional headcount before we actually kind of ramped it up.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
For the go-to-market engineer role, can you tell us more about how you're thinking about that role? And the reason I ask, I've had like 5 founders now mention that to me, and it seems like that's an emerging title that's going to become a big part of the marketing department or the marketing department in some cases. So
Yeah, literally, I've only known about this role for 2 weeks now, so I'm pretty new to it as well. But was having conversations with a bunch of different founders and folks, and I do think it is a newer title and role where it's somebody who's technical enough to be able to connect in with a bunch of different systems, create a data lake or data warehouse, but also use agentic workflows to be able to. And there's one guy I was talking to already over at Sightline, just blowing my mind. He was like, I have like 50 different inboxes. That way I'm not getting, blocked by all the domains of the companies, and Google's not flagging me as like sending out spam. And it's like sending out 50 emails a day from each of these inboxes, but also receiving emails into the inboxes from the other email addresses so that it doesn't think I'm an outbound only inbox. And like, this is a one-man show doing all of this, all the like send very crafted, personalized emails to different prospects. And yeah, it's like, it just kind of blew my mind, that just learning how much this one individual was able to do, having some brand and marketing, kind of chops as well around like messaging and really understanding how to A/B test conversion rates and landing pages. So, I'm going to open the rec. We'll see how many people are out there. I think probably hard to find people with past experience, but you're kind of looking for those like tinkers and the roll up your sleeve, like folks that, may have been an engineer in a past life and didn't like it and moved to marketing or vice versa. And yeah, I mean, it's, as soon as I heard kind of the role, originally it was, more of kind of like a head of growth title I was thinking about hiring for, another kind of fuzzy nebulous title. But he was like, you need to, have a rec for a good market engineer. It's a thing now. And I was like, that's great. And that's exactly what I'm looking for.
What about on Category? So when I did the intro, I introduced you as a construction workforce management platform. Is that how you identify? Like, is that the category that you're in, that you want to be in?
That is, yeah. It's a newer category in the construction industry, probably the last 3 or 4 years, and one that we definitely kind of helped create. But man, it's been a journey. When we started, there wasn't software for the field. PlanGrid was one of the few companies kind of putting software in the hands of mostly superintendents, certainly not foremen and workers, which is where we were, half our users were. And, the very early days, I think our first marketing was trying to do workforce telematics. And so, equipment telematics was a thing in the construction industry. So they were like, hey, you track utilization of equipment. How about you track utilization of labor? People didn't understand that, kind of right over their head. For a while, we were branded as the field data company. That was like, again, like a company branding that was ahead of its time. People were just like, just what do you do? I field data, like, tell me what you do. And we moved to time and resource management and then pivoted into field and workforce management. And workforce management has definitely begun to stick. We see more people kind of label and brand themselves as such. And it makes sense. There's a lot of other kind of back office platforms, human capital management platforms, Bamboo HR, ADP, Paylocity, and stuff like that do well for the HR functions for the office staff, but really fall on their face when they get out to the field. And so that's where field and workforce management came in. And, really it's kind of the nexus of a little bit of the ERP, a little bit of the human capital management, but a lot of the white space in between those two.
What about, founder, people call it different things. Some call it founder branding, some call it founder-led marketing. I was telling you in the pre-interview there, you have the most badass profile picture on your LinkedIn. So I have to imagine that there's some intention there. And you said you've done a bunch of podcast interviews. So talk to us about that idea of, really putting yourself out there.
Yeah, I think it's super important. In the early days, the founder is the brand, right? The founding team is the brand, right? Zach and Drew, like everyone knew Zach and Drew were kind of out there. It was these two Navy guys, two Navy veterans doing a construction tech startup. It's really hard to differentiate the company brand from that founder brand. And so, yeah, I think it's just super important. And what makes a strong founder brand, it is a bit of a cheesy cliche buzzword, but it's authenticity. Like if you're inauthentic, it's very easy to spot. And conversely, if you're authentic, it's easy to relate with. It just kind of makes sense. It builds trust. It builds rapport. And yeah, I grew up around the construction industry in Ohio. My dad sold construction equipment all throughout the Midwest. So I grew up with like a trailer in my front yard, a couple mornings each week with compaction equipment and like jackhammers and stuff like that on it. Worked professionally in the industry for 10 years and then, really just saw an opportunity to try to help move it forward into the 21st century with technology. And, that's, what gets me up and excited about doing work every day and building technology specifically for people that have been underserved by it in the field. And, you don't make it 11 years into a startup unless you got some sort of intrinsic motivation. And so I think, for founders building their brand, it's just like, don't be afraid to kind of be who you are and say what you say. Like, workers first was a big tagline for us early on. It was like, we're building software for workers first because they need good software. And, there's what I firmly believed, and it resonated with people in the industry, and it really kind of helped build a following. And beyond that, also influenced how our product team designed and built the product and some of the product decisions that we made to help build software that felt like it was useful to workers, not something that's being forced down on them by the accounting department to help micromanage them.
When you reflect on this entire journey, so over a decade in, what do you think's been the most important go-to-market decision that you've made to date? And take us behind the scenes and talk about that decision. And of course, let's skip the pivot because we already went deep on that.
Yeah. Most important go-to-market decision to date. We made the decision to pivot upmarket. And so, for us, product and go-to-market have to be very closely linked together. And so we kind of made the decision to go like mid-market and upmarket, which informed our kind of go-to-market. We're having a little bit smaller TAM, but it was a lot larger, like average sale price. And, for us and being able to have a field sales team, like you had to have that higher ASP to be able to kind of scale cost effectively. Conversely, we could have gone the other direction and gone down market and built more self-service tools. And I think that would have worked as well, but not being intentional about what market, was just kind of leading to disaster, death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that's what we were kind of doing out of the gate. It was like, we'll talk to anyone that's going to talk to us and try to sell to them. And, it wasn't until we just said, hey, we're not going to sell to these customers that aren't willing to spend $5,000 or $10,000. Like, did they end up being way more a drag on our professional services and our customer success team than the big customers? Let's just focus on the big customers. And, from that point forward, you get higher NPS, you get more evangelistic customer base, you get more referrals. So yeah, just being very intentional about aligning your product with the market segment that you're going after was probably the number one decision that we made.
Now, final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like that you're building?
I mean, it's continuing this mission. Like the blue collar workforce really continues to be underserved by tools. It's really kind of building out more of a blue collar human capital management platform, help workers better document their journey professionally. Ideally have a kind of, worker, LinkedIn profile of sorts, for example, that they can take to that next company that has their level of experience, the types of jobs they've worked on, the types of work they've done, the certifications that they have, be able to kind of build that track record. We call it kind of like the back of the baseball card statistics. Like construction is a very like machismo filled industry. And like folks love being like, this is how many like thousands of hours of work I've done on all these hundreds of projects. And, how many, tons of, duct work I've installed over my life, and, how many cubic meters of concrete I've placed. And they don't have that today. And so, really continuing to help workers with digital tools, while at the same time having the data that they generate, help the management of the projects lead to better outcomes. So I see nothing but white space ahead, and excited to continue to grow into that area.
Amazing, man. I love it. Well, it's been a really fun conversation. You're an incredible founder, building an incredible company. So really appreciate you taking the time to chat. Before we wrap here, if there's anyone that's listening in that just wants to follow along with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, Rhumbix.com, RHUMBIX.com, or look me up on LinkedIn.
Amazing. We'll see you in Marin.
See you in Marin.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.